We're all, of course, eagerly awaiting the keynote speech from NVIDIA, as they undoubtedly are going to be talking a fair bit about Volta somewhere in this speech. But before we get to that, which at the time of recording is not too far in the future, about 30 minutes or so away, we have some few bits to discuss, the first of which is regarding SK Hynix and GDDR6 memory, and the second is regarding Raven Ridge and the Ryzen APU. So, SK Hynix has given us the first real information on their next-gen GDDR6 memory tech at GTC 2017. Now, they will be showcasing full-fledged wafers and so on, and they're going to be doing so at NVIDIA's GTC, meaning that, of course, as we kind of already suspected, NVIDIA will be among the first to leverage this new memory architecture. So, this means that we've got a bit of a partnership going on between SK Hynix and NVIDIA. Now, of course, NVIDIA have been using GDDR5X up until now. Obviously, any future chips, they are going to be making the shift to GDDR6. They, of course, have already seen pretty nice results with the 5X memory. With their work with Micron, they have managed to top out HBM, and they're hoping at least to repeat history with HBM2 and to top that out again with GDDR6. And, of course, not only top it out in terms of the gains and performance and so on that you get from it, but also to kind of go around the production issues that have been unfortunately plaguing HBM2. And when you're talking mass production, mass quantities needed for gaming and so on, that's pretty critical. Obviously, that's always important, but even more so for something that's obviously going to be quite costly to produce. You don't want any unnecessary issues plugging up the production pipeline. But let's talk specifics, shall we, for SK Hynix, as they did show off the very first DRAM chip at GTC this year, and it has a capacity of 1 GB. They are planning to launch denser capacities up to 2 GB in the second half of 2018. Now, in terms of speed, we are looking at quite a significant jump. We've gone from 12 gigabits per second to 16, and this is pretty impressive when you consider the fact that the Titan XP, well, has about 547.7 gigabytes a second using 11.4 gigabits per second GDDR5X. So, yeah, you can kind of get where I'm driving at with that. And obviously, HBM2 has some pretty impressive figures of itself. You know, obviously Vega is coming along soon from AMD, and that's said to feature 512 gigabytes a second too, along with pretty nice bandwidth and yada yada yada. But, you know, depending on the specifications of Volta, this does actually mean that Volta could actually be aligned to outdo Vega when it comes to memory bandwidth, which obviously isn't everything, but it is a very important component. And of course, it's not just in terms of raw bandwidth or anything like that. We're also seeing savings in terms of power. For example, GDDR6 has a 10% power saving over the current Gen 5 memory chips, and obviously lower voltage with twice the bandwidth. So, yeah, you can kind of get where I'm going with this, and this kind of lines up with some of the comments that were made by the CEO, which basically say that they're not concerned about Vega. They're not concerned about what AMD are doing. The actual quote is, "My assessment is that the competitive position is not going to change." So they are pretty confident that Vega, as good as it is looking, is not going to be a concern for them over at NVIDIA. But obviously, this is all speculation. Obviously, not the SK Hynix thing. I mean, how Vega and Volta are going to do against each other. But of course, we're going to get a clearer picture of what could happen most likely during the keynote speech. I would be surprised if we don't hear about Volta during it, but of course, as always, I misplaced my crystal ball. So let's move on to AMD, since I did mention them very briefly, as we've actually had some leaks for the first engineering sample for the Raven Ridge APU, and this has leaked over at the Syssoft software database. And to be honest, these leaks pretty much confirm the details that we've kind of been hearing for a while regarding the specs for Raven Ridge. But obviously, this is all speculation and rumour and so on. You know, do take it with a pinch of salt as always, but it does line up with what we've previously been hearing. And to be honest, it goes without saying that Raven Ridge is going to be quite the step up when you compare it to, say, Steamroller or Excavator and so on. Obviously, it's going to be having Zen cores. It's hardly a shocker, given that it is, of course, going to be having the Ryzen branding on it, so, you know, hardly a fucking newsworthy thing that it's going to be having Zen cores, but it's also going to have increased IPC and efficiency, along with newer graphics cores that are going to be, or that are said to have, rather, the same enhancements as the Vega class of GPU. So not only a bit of Ryzen in there, but a bit of Vega thrown in for a bit of flavouring. So the listing on the SysSoftware database does reveal some interesting things. Some are purely like, oh, that's interesting to know, but not really relevant. For example, the codename is AMD Mandolin Raven. But the more interesting thing is that, okay, it's going to be based on the Zen core architecture, and we'll have 4 cores and 8 threads, and the base clock speed is going to be 3 GHz with a max boost of 3.3. And again, as always, these are engineering samples, and these should not be taken as final clocks. We can also see, of course, that it has 2 megs of L2 cache and 4 megs of L3, and is also going to have 11 compute units. And obviously we already know what this means, and, well, you might say, what do you mean we know what this means? Well, it means that it's going to have 704 stream processors, as of course the new CPU design from AMD means that you have 64 stream processors per compute unit, so that means 704. As for the clock speed, is going to be 800 megahertz for the graphics chip, I should say. Sorry, be more specific there. Now, there are some clues to be also garnered from the long and boring number that is the naming that it isn't the AMD Raven thing. It basically tells us, in short, that this is for desktop and not for server, which is kind of what we expected, and is going to be for AM4. You know, as Robert Halleck himself said in my recent coverage of his talk at the Dragon Squad trip from MSI, they are hoping to stick with AM4 until at least 2020, so it's hardly a surprise that we will be seeing them stick with AM4 for Raven Ridge, especially as well it is using the Zen core technology. So with all that said, I think a lot of these things are going to be expanded upon or made clearer when we have the talk, which is coming up very, very soon. I will, of course, be watching, and I'll give you my thoughts and highlights of this particular live stream. I have no doubt we're going to be seeing a lot of stuff that isn't super relevant, like self-driving cars and so on, but undoubtedly we will be seeing a lot of tasty, juicy information as well, and I can't wait to get stuck in. So, I'll see you guys in a bit with my overview of what NVIDIA are going to be up to in the next couple of years, which undoubtedly they'll be very eager to share very shortly. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.